start with what you were doing in Denver.
Okay.
Path.
Sure. So in Denver, I had a company called Green Spaces that I had started in New York City in 2008. And I continued it in Denver. And it started in Denver in 2009. And it's a co-working space for ecological entrepreneurs in Rhino. And it still exists today, which I'm really proud to see. They're actually in the middle of growing to the 16th Street Mall. So yeah, it's amazing to see. It's almost 20 years later that this collective of ecological entrepreneurs continues to grow there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so there's a lot to it, and I know your whole story, so it's hard for me to angle into what fits the podcast best. But you had a rather abrupt departure from the US. Do you want to speak about kind of however you
Sure.
take it?
Yeah. So basically, I met my husband, who's Belgian, 2 years before we left the United States. And after I met him, we had come to France a couple times, and there was a couple things converging at the same time. First, life in the US was becoming increasingly stressful for us. There were several different things that were happening that were increasing the pressure on our life there. And at the same time, we had done a couple trips to France, and I started to just feel the energy of how calm and beautiful France was, and kind of just dreaming, like, what if we could go to France? But at the time, it just felt so far-fetched because I had this company in the US that we were running. We had done an expansion there. But as I look back, it was kind of like the two forces were growing. The dream of going to France and seeing and feeling that beauty and that calm, looking at houses. Actually, we looked at houses online in Albufeira before we moved there, which is really funny. And then the stress building and building and building in the US, like it was becoming overwhelming. Just the cost of living. We were starting to look for a house to buy, and to purchase a house was, yeah, it was already back then. That was in 2016, was just becoming, yeah, I really felt like we're going to work for the next 25 years to pay off this house 45 minutes from Denver. So those two forces were happening, and it continued growing. And I won't get into all the details, but the pressure just kept growing. And I started to also envision, we had two dogs at the time, one big dog and a small dog, of if we did come back to Europe, because my husband always made it clear that he did want to eventually move back to Europe. And I'm Danish as well, and have always appreciated and liked Europe a lot too. Yeah, we also wanted to bring our dogs. So we found out that there's a ship called the Queen Mary that takes dogs, and it's typically a 2.5 year wait list to get your dog on that ship because there's only a certain number of spots. So when everything was feeling like incredibly overwhelming for us in the US, and we were still looking for a house, it wasn't really coming together, actually, I realized that there was 3 months before the Queen Mary leaves, there's cancellations for dogs, and there's a chance that day that you can actually get on the Queen Mary 3 months from then. So I called 3 months before the Queen Mary was leaving, December 8th of 2016. And it turned out that exact day, there was a cancellation for two dogs, a big and a small, that could fit in a kennel together. And we had to make a decision within 20 minutes, or like right then, because people were calling in to get that spot. If not, we could go to Europe 2.5 years later because we could not bring our large dog on the plane. So it was not even fully conscious. Like we were not actually really fully prepared to make this decision, even though it had been kind of building in the back of our minds. And we just decided to buy, and you couldn't get the money back either. So we decided to buy the ship tickets that day, which was a significant amount of our savings. Yeah.
So I love, like, okay, so there was all this pressure
Yeah.
that was building in your life, right? And that can be a
Yeah.
comfortable place to be in for anyone, that sense of things aren't working, something needs
Yeah.
to change, and just feeling that. And then all of a sudden you get this opportunity.
It was like a light in the darkness.
It was alignment. That was,
It
the
was.
whole point of this podcast is this, what is the evidence of alignment? And you
Yeah.
were so aligned with that desire to
And
part.
and that, like, all of a sudden that day, this thought came to me of like, wait a minute. And I'd called like several months before, that the fact that popped in my mind, it was not even conscious. It was like something else. And they had just gotten a cancellation just before I called.
Yeah, that's wild.
And it was like a light because the pressure was getting so hard. It was like I couldn't breathe. And
Mhm.
2 years before that, life was actually going pretty well in the US. Like we were doing an expansion. I met Ward. I bought a place in Crested Butte. I like really planned on living there before I met him for like the rest of my life. And all of a sudden, it was like things switched and it was one thing after another. And the pressure was so intense that I couldn't even bear it almost anymore. And then
Mhm.
that ship ticket, and all of a sudden we could see it was like, wait, there's a light actually here, but we didn't have a plan. So, yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, and so that's a really good a good thing to bring up, this no plan, and yet you still took steps forward. What do you think was propelling you?
I mean, I think that life, it was becoming so obvious that life was not working for us in the US anymore. Because now that I live in France, I can't even imagine making that kind of decision. So for me now, because life is working for us in France, like I really like how it's going and developing. But it's such a sign too that sometimes when things get so hard, it's a pushing energy because
Mhm.
otherwise I would never have the courage to do that right now in my life because I'm not being pushed like that. So I do believe that sometimes if life gets so hard, you have to look around and see where is the, even if it's completely outside the box, like where are you being pushed to go actually?
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's weird. It's actually now I realize sometimes the hardest things are they're pushing you in a direction that you're supposed to go in that you'd never have the courage to go in otherwise.
Mhm.
I think in hindsight. And now I'm so grateful that we did that. It's like, wow, good job to us in hindsight. Because at the time I was like, what are we doing?